Among the Mario fanbase, there's a concept that you'll see pop up from time to time in online discussions and videos: the theory of Mario mandates. It's kinda everywhere you look. Despite being past the peak of it as a hot button topic, it's still brought up frequently in relation to new and old Mario spin-off titles. But what does it refer to? Was there any truth to the theory, or was it all some kind of misunderstanding? Let's talk about it. The idea was born from some controversial Mario games released in the 2010s. New Super Mario Bros. 2, Paper Mario Sticker Star, and Mario & Luigi Paper Jam drew the most ire, but believe me, it wasn't limited to just those. Games during this era were divisive for some fans because of their more standardized Mario aesthetic, environment themes, plot, and even gameplay in Paper Mario's case. Things like NSMB's colorful grassland mountains showed up in almost everything at the time. Paper Mario Sticker Star greatly reduced the amount of dialogue and unique characters present, leaning on a loosely connected string of gags to push the story along. Sticker Star shifted the gameplay of the sub-series away from being an action-focused RPG to more of an adventure game that happens to have turn-based battles. This direction carried on into its 2 sequels, despite fans making it clear they weren't big on it, to put it nicely. At the same time, a bunch of interviews popped up containing quotes such as, "It's fine without a story, so do we really need one? As much as possible, complete it with only characters from the Super Mario world," and...
So you know about the Mario and Luigi game series
Yes.
as well, right? So since we already have that series of games that's, this kind of more of a straight-up RPG, we kind of feel like it would be a shame if, like, in this other series of games we weren't doing something that was more different and was giving something different to the customers. And I think those original Paper Mario games, what people liked about them was, as you say, the RPG elements, but there was also, the colorful characters, the puzzle solving, the humor. So, in the newer games we're focusing more on, the puzzle solving aspects and the humor.
Skipping ahead a bit, in an interview about Paper Mario the Origami King, then producer of the Paper Mario series, Kensuke Tanabe, said they were no longer able to graphically represent individual characteristics when asked about how they handle NPCs and humor. Back in the 2010s, there was a push from the 3D Mario team to try and capture the spirit of classic 2D Mario games in a 3D space, leading to both 3D Land and 3D World. Initially, despite being very well received overall, many found the games disappointing, safe, or stale compared to the Galaxy duology and the sandbox 3D Marios. Never mind the 2 NSMB games that came out just 4 months apart. NSMB 2 directly reused most of its assets from NSMB Wii, which itself bordered on being a level pack for NSMB DS with 4-player co-op thrown in. NSMBU did try to remix the environment themes a bit, but on the whole it still reused as much as it could. In the end, it hardly looked any different to folks because of this. Now you might be seeing why there was a growing concern. It felt to many like higher-ups within Nintendo truly were mandating the spin-offs to be more in line with the new Super Mario Bros. Games due to their massive popularity. They sold more copies than all but 2 Call of Duty games. However, I'm not convinced that all this amounts to the influence of just a few people. I think the reasons a lot of this happened has more to do with a few things that are often overlooked. Let's talk about development time and budget constraints. Games take a lot of time and even more money to make. Across the past couple of decades, in all corners of the industry, you'll find experts talking at length about this. Few put it better than Satoru Iwata did at a keynote he hosted at 2005's Game Developers Conference.
Of course, the games themselves have become much bigger in several ways. They are bigger in a technical sense, occupying more digital space. That, in turn, requires bigger teams, bigger budgets, and bigger challenges in meeting deadlines. This also means that big game companies are getting bigger by consuming smaller ones. We know that in the next generation, budgets for AAA console games will regularly move into 8 digits, and that's before any marketing money is spent. Only the biggest companies can afford such cost.
It's well documented that Nintendo wasn't looking so good in the 2010s, for a lot of the reasons Iwata stated in that clip. Developing 3DS games could be almost as expensive as Wii, which led to a troubled start for the platform. It ended up a moderate success, but only after an early, severe price cut. The Wii U straight up died on arrival, with release droughts that would make the Sahara blush. In-house devs struggled to acclimate to HD development, leading to repeated delays for many titles. Things were so bad, Iwata, Miyamoto, and several other higher-ups at Nintendo took a huge pay cut just to mitigate some of the loss. Even then, Nintendo lost nearly $1 billion over the course of just 2 to 3 years. The increase in fidelity and the accompanying challenges during that era are likely the biggest culprits behind the shift in Mario spin-offs, the best example being Mario and Luigi Dream Team. And to start things off, let's focus on sprites for a bit. In 2013, the developers of hand-drawn fighting game Skullgirls launched a crowdfunding campaign for additional characters. To help illustrate why they needed to do this, they released this image breaking down the costs that go into making a character. Note the estimate for creating the sprite. Key figures in the space who have worked on similar projects from AAA companies weighed in on it, saying it was pretty accurate. Now back to Mario. In various interviews about Dream Team, AlphaDream staff spoke at length about how grueling making the game was. They made a new phase of development and rebooted development several times, among other things. The main reason for this hardship being how time-consuming and difficult it was to create all the sprite art for the characters. Not only did they make the sprites so they wouldn't stick out too much compared to the 3D environments in stereoscopic 3D, they also increased the number of directions characters can face from 8 to 16. This basically doubled the already intense workload, on top of there just being more frames of animation for a smoother look compared to previous installments. For example, Luigi alone has a staggering 14,836 total frames of animation in Dream Team, according to this post by Super Mario Broth. Now, obviously, the average individual sprite in this game is nowhere near as big as the ones in Skullgirls, as it was made for the 3DS's 240p display as opposed to the massive home TVs HD games like Skullgirls are made for. But keep in mind that an RPG like Dream Team necessitates making sprites for hundreds more characters between NPCs, enemies, and bosses. Because of Mario and Luigi's action command and counter systems, enemies and bosses in the series need tons of carefully crafted attack animations. Bosses also have the additional challenge of needing to be very large on screen to allow them to be more expressive and imposing than the average enemy. This stuff almost certainly adds up over time, as we can see by the fact the game often had several times as many artists working on each subset of sprites compared to the original DS version of Bowser's Inside Story. All this animation made the game take around 4 years to develop, which is a century for a 3DS game. For comparison, 3D Land only took 2 years to develop. To put it another way, that's as long as active development took for PS4's God of War. That lengthy dev time means that Dream Team was inordinately expensive to make for a company of AlphaDream's size. Couple that with Dream Team underperforming, only managing a little over half of the sales of Bowser's Inside Story, as well as Paper Jam struggling to sell over 1 million units, and you have a recipe for financial disaster. With this in mind, it's easy to see why AlphaDream would scramble to remake the two fan-favorite Mario and Luigi titles, being Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story. Judging by the corners they cut by reusing as much as they could, and replacing smaller elements with stuff from Dream Team and Paper Jam, this was a clear last-ditch effort to recoup whatever costs they could to keep the company afloat. Random oddities, like Psycho Comic being replaced by Dr. Toadley, can be explained by the fact that they rushed to remake Bowser's Inside Story as soon as they were done with Superstar Saga. They could save time by reusing as many assets that weren't in DT or PJ between the two remakes. This ultimately didn't work, with AlphaDream sadly declaring bankruptcy just 8.5 months after the release of the Bowser's Inside Story remake. While AlphaDream is the most extreme case of them all, I firmly believe the reasons for these cost-saving measures apply to every single Mario title released during this period. Just look at NSMB 2 and U. Why were those games so similar to Wii? It's because they were the quickest things the 2D Mario team could make for two platforms desperate for new hit games. In 2's case, it was also a good way to onboard level designers new to 2D Mario. U's development started with the deadline being Wii U's launch, before there were even any dev kits for it. With only old tools to work with and time that limited, they could only do so much to make it more unique. Paper Mario Sticker Star was completely overhauled midway through development, which likely left it with a much more strict deadline than it should have had. Its two sequels are HD games, increasing the workload for the sprites and environments. Even with the low frame count of Paper Mario's characters, art at this fidelity is still expensive and time-consuming. For example, Color Splash's lush paper-craft environments took the art team a while to dial in. The sports games were victims of this too. In an interview with Famitsu, Camelot's sibling presidents, Hiroyuki and Shugo Takahashi said that the team was both scared of the challenges of HD development and worried if a team as small as theirs should even try to tackle them in the first place. Yeah, you're seeing that right. That's all the people they've got. Camelot has been operating with around 40 or less employees for decades. I showed it earlier, but around the time AlphaDream were in the thick of developing Dream Team, they only had 38 employees. While a much bigger company overall, in 2016, the year Color Splash released, Intelligent Systems had 134 employees. In the credits for Color Splash, we can see that only about 90 people from the company worked on the game out of the total 272 contributors, not counting special thanks. Keep in mind, this manpower is shared with the Fire Emblem team. Unlike Mario, Insys co-owns that IP, so it's within their best interest to prioritize it. Nintendo Cube, who's worked on Mario Party since 9, is similar in size to Intelligent Systems. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly how many employees they had during the Wii U era, but today, they have about 122 people. Seeing as Mario Party 10 had 167 people across the key areas of development and how many games they were juggling, it's safe to say that the number of Nintendo Cube members working on each title was much less than 122. They released 6 games within 4 years, with 3 of those being HD titles they would have to make pricey, time-consuming assets for. How am I so sure these things were more expensive to make? Well, let's get into that now. How much did it cost to make those older games? The 2010 spin-offs did more often reuse assets and concepts in comparison to the 2000s. However, that's likely because games on GameCube, Wii, GBA, and DS cost so little to make compared to even early HD platforms, so it wasn't as necessary. According to data compiled by the CESA in 2005, the average PS2 and GameCube title developed in Japan costed around 90 to 96 million yen, which translates to about 820 to 880,000 US dollars at the time. GBA titles averaged out to 53 million yen, which was around $485,000. When looking towards the West, where labor is typically more expensive compared to Japan, for GameCube you will consistently see development budget estimates hover around the $3 to $6 million range. Factor 5 was a higher-end third-party developer for Nintendo 64 and GameCube, and at a GDC keynote they went into detail about budgets. Here, they estimate $3 to $6 million US dollars for GameCube development. Initial projections for their first PS3 title, Lair, came out to 12 to 15 million, with general AAA HD development expected to land around 17 to 20 million. In 2007, during a talk at the Dow Jones Consumer Technology Innovations Conference, Reggie Dow went over why DS and Wii were on such a hot streak. Among the reasons given was cost of development. Reggie states that DS games only costed a few $100,000 to develop, with them only needing to sell 100,000 units to turn a profit. MSRP for DS titles in the US was typically $35 or $40. Development spend on Wii games was also very lean for the time. According to Reggie, with marketing included, a standard game might have costed somewhere around $5 million, with the absolute highest end Wii games requiring $10 million to get out the door. He then estimates that games on PS3 and 360 could cost $20 million to as high as $50 million to develop. This figure is somewhat supported by comments from other industry members as well. In late 2006, then president of Namco, Takeo Takasu, explained that due to the hefty cost of making HD assets, the budget for the average game in Japan would rise to around 1 billion yen, or 8.6 million US dollars at the time, which he asserted is double that of Wii titles. Because of all that, Namco would need to sell at least 500,000 of their 2 PS3 launch titles in order to turn a profit on them. In the West, we see a similar trend. Halo 3, released for the 360 in 2007, reportedly cost $30 million to develop, with advertising costing an additional $30 to $40 million. In 2009, Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot expected the average game budget to soar upwards of $60 million in the near future, placing an estimate for current HD titles between $20 to $30 million. To recap, here's the development cost for each of these platforms. GameCube as low as $850,000 to $6 million, with inflation bringing that to $1.4 to $9.3 million in today's money. GBA's $485,000 average would be around $800,000 today. Wii's $5 to $10 million, with marketing included, lands at about $7.7 to $15.5 million today. For DS, if we assume a few $100,000 means around $3 to $500,000, would be about $465 to $776,000 today. With what Iwata said about the most expensive 3DS games rivaling Wii titles, it's probably reasonable to place that around the 7 to 10 million range for most retail releases, when considering marketing costs. Now, I couldn't really find good figures for Wii U and Switch 1 development, considering that Wii U specs were slightly stronger than PS3, while Switch 1 is between Wii U and PS4, the numbers given for PS3 are probably the best bet. That data came in from 2006 to 2009. so inflation would likely bring that well within the low to middle tens of millions for Wii U titles, with likely a few million added on for Switch 1 development. Before we move on, I want to give an example of how restrictive budgets can hold a game back. Let's quickly talk about Devil May Cry 4, released for PS3 and 360 in 2008. While beloved by many, a common criticism of the game is its second half. Dante takes over as the main character, and you travel through all the levels you went through as Nero, but in reverse, complete with the same bosses. According to the director, Hideaki Itsuno, this was due to a variety of factors. In an interview, he explained that the team was given very little time and only about the same budget they had for Devil May Cry 3, a PS2 game that came out 3 years prior. Due to the team needing time to figure out the tools necessary to create HD assets, and them being pricey to begin with, they were brushing up against the deadline on top of being short on money. The only option was to take some pretty severe shortcuts. So, even though these spin-offs likely cost a fraction of what main series games did, the titles released on 3DS, Wii U, and Switch 1 were likely way more expensive to make compared to their predecessors. Even something that appears low cost like Mario Tennis Aces likely landed in or near that $10 to $15 million range before market, considering how much environment art they had to make and how many characters they had to animate, especially with those free content updates. This is probably why most of the Switch 1 sports titles had so little content at launch. In addition to helping fill out the release calendar, these games needed to justify themselves before Nintendo was willing to invest more into them. All this should paint a pretty clear picture of the conditions the 2010s spin-offs were made under. Small to mid-sized teams working on tighter budgets and schedules than you would expect. With the exception of Kart and recently Party, these spin-offs tend to not sell a ton for Mario standards. This is why they're sold for full price, to ensure they turn a decent profit. Outside of those conditions, there's still reason to doubt the Mario mandate theory. You know, the Paper Mario games that are held as the best evidence mandates existed? They were developed and released right alongside others that directly contradict the whole idea. Sticker Star development began in 2009, and planning for Dream Team started soon after the release of Bowser's Inside Story, which released in 2009. These games were released a mere 8 months apart. If Miyamoto was upset enough to force insist to ditch unique NPCs and story, why the hell would he allow Dream Team to proceed as is? Active development for Color Splash began sometime in 2013, with early ideas floating soon after Sticker Star released in late 2012. Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle entered development in 2014, which is a game best known for having Mario characters and environments intermingled with Rayman's Rabbid characters. With both games releasing 10 months apart, and the latter having Miyamoto's personal approval, I doubt there was enough time for a sudden change of heart to affect either game much. I don't think it's as simple as most fans tend to think. Miyamoto was flat out bored by a spring 2011 build of Sticker Star. If similar to what was shown at E3 that year, that's basically what we got at retail. On top of that, Risa Tabata plainly stated that the Paper Mario team had full creative control for Color Splash. It's apparent they just wanted to keep going that direction, for whatever reason. Next, I want to point out something I've only seen a few folks bring up in mandate discussions. I don't think the NSMB-ification of the series was anything new because the spin-offs have always cut corners like this. During an interview in a 2003 issue of Nintendo Dream magazine, the dev team for Mario Kart Double Dash went into detail about all sorts of things. At one point, two of the producers, Shinya Takahashi and Tadashi Sugiyama, mentioned how DK Jr. was planned for the game. However, they ended up scrapping him for Diddy Kong, due to him being more recognizable. The interviewer then notes that Diddy is also playable in Mario Golf Toadstool Tour, and asks if the models were able to be shared between the two games. Shinya Takahashi confirms this, saying, yes, the base models are the same, but we revised them according to the needs of each game. Now, take a look at these screenshots. And these. Take a good look at Mario's models here. They're all damn near identical, and I just showed you a bunch of different games across GameCube and Wii. Spin-offs in the 2000s era formed their general identities around the latest Mario platformers, similar to the 2010s. Mario 64 and Sunshine environments, characters, and even sounds were constantly reused or adapted for spin-offs. Just look at Double Dash's general presentation and theming, Power Tennis's Sunshine and Luigi's Mansion Courts, The look of the Grassland courses and Toadstool Tour, or even how more unique games like TTYD still have lots of sunshine theming. Even the early spin-offs in the series did this constantly. Super Mario Kart is overtly based on Mario World, right down to a couple track themes sharing names with worlds in World. Mario Kart 64 sprites were made with edited versions of the CG models made for Mario 64, where applicable. A lot of the track theming and visuals were pretty clearly based on Mario World and 64 too. Early Mario parties also cribbed a lot from the main series. The first takes a ton from Mario 64 in particular. Mario's Rainbow Castle, Peach's Birthday Cake, and Bowser's Magma Mountain certainly aren't trying to be subtle about it. A huge chunk of the minigames are inspired by stuff in 64, often featuring enemies and obstacles from the game. A lot of these models are identical or clearly based on their 64 counterparts. There's more examples than that, but I'll leave it there. Hopefully you see what I mean. Mario spin-offs have been repurposing character models, environments, and sounds for ages. It's one of the most effective ways of lowering cost and speeding up development. Even if you're not directly reusing stuff, basing what you're making off of something that already exists is still an efficient shortcut. It's less time you have to devote to concepting and refining your art assets, and those are among the most time-consuming aspects of game development. For instance, at 2024's GDC, key environment artists for Diablo 4 discussed what it took for the team to breathe life into the game's world. During a post-talk Q&A segment, a member of the audience asked senior environment artist Merin Fatima how long it generally takes to go from the blockout phase of environment design to the polished phase. Blockout meaning the base level geometry that level designers provide to the art team. Environment artists then look towards concept art and real-life references, so they can create fitting assets and place them over the blockout, reaching the polish phase once they've blended and refined them enough to look natural. Fatima responds that the length of this process can vary depending on the scope of the specific environment. At this fidelity, however, even the simplest areas still range from taking months to who knows how long, implying that it could even take close to a year. On the other side of the spectrum, we have Ryuga Gotoku Studio, the team responsible for the Like a Dragon or Yakuza series. Folks have often wondered how they're able to release so many of these games in such short time frames, and the leads of RGG have given the answers in various interviews. Head director Masayoshi Yokoyama stated in an interview with the Washington Post that they reuse as much as they can from older titles. Most games take place in the same city, so they're easily able to retool gameplay features, models, textures, sounds, and even animations across many years. In an interview with Automaton, he explains that their one-team structure allows them to work on and release several games at once. Mid-development of Like a Dragon 8, RGG began work on a remake of Like a Dragon Ishin, and a prequel to 8 called Like a Dragon Gaiden. All three were able to be released in just 11 months, with Gaiden taking a mere 6 months to develop from start to finish. Despite the series being generally cheaper than other AAA titles, it's still at a much bigger scale than most, if not all, Mario spin-offs. That said, this should still give you an idea how time-consuming coming up with new concepts is. Through these past couple of sections, you might have thought of something like the Koopalings in Color Splash who were newly made for that game, with no assets to easily reuse from any prior Paper Mario game. Using pre-existing characters would still mean the team wouldn't have to spend as much time as it would take to come up with new villains, skipping likely the longest phase of asset creation. Spin-offs in the 2000s used theming from the main series in ways that felt more natural than the 2010s, but that could be partially another consequence of increasing fidelity. Downscaling an area like Delfino Plaza for Mario Tennis was probably much easier than it would be to do the same thing to a location like the Lake Kingdom, due to the difference in polygon count and texture resolution. It's always been the case that an asset optimized for one type of game can tank performance in another, but it's especially true these days with how complex geometry has become. Maintaining the visual appeal of a location is important in this regard, and downgrades were much less obvious when these environments were being rendered in resolutions as low as 360p as opposed to the 1080p or 4K we're used to now. Making games is never easy, especially not at the scale Nintendo operates. While there's certainly room for criticism on all sides, things are rarely as simple as anyone on the outside thinks, myself included. The games I talked about here, even the smallest ones, are collaborative projects that 100+ people contribute to. Compromises are both necessary and frequently made. Management can make or break a project, that much is true, but trying to pin all of the praise or blame on one person is simply unrealistic most of the time. The constant demonization of key developers like Miyamoto is just going to lead to more rampant disrespect towards creatives in the future, and that could end up circling back to you. Even if it's true that Sticker Star's weak dialogue is due to Miyamoto's suggestions, he never told them to also remove partners or any of the many missing RPG mechanics. Criticism of a game shouldn't feel like some kind of indictment of the creators themselves. The developers of the games we claim to care about deserve better than that. I think you have the time to spare and truly care about games as a medium. You should dig as deep as possible to find out as much as you can about games you like and dislike. There's always something to learn from a game's development. Broadening your perspective will help make debates like these healthier for everyone. Also, I don't think it's all doom and gloom for Mario spin-offs. There's a silver lining here, and it's that Nintendo is the rare game company that actually uses their success to help fund smaller projects. We've seen a lot of that over the Switch generation, and Mario isn't an exception. They remade Mario RPG and Thousand Year Door, and gave Mario and Luigi a new installment with Brothership. Brothership has probably the most diverse locations of any Mario RPG since Partners in Time, while also taking place far away from the Mushroom Kingdom for a change. Mario Tennis Fever shipped with the most content in series history. It did reuse a lot to get there, but I think it does enough to make itself feel fresh still. I'm sure those won't be the only examples. I fully expect Mario titles on Switch 2 to continue following this trend. It makes sense they'd increase in scale and scope now that Nintendo's bigger than they've ever been, especially since these dev teams also have a lot more experience with HD development. Thank you so much for watching. Regardless of if you agree or disagree with my assessment here, I hope you were able to take away something from this video. This was by far the longest I've worked on any project. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe. Because of everyone's support, I managed to go from 87 all the way to 1,000 subscribers in a little under 6 months. I cannot thank you all enough for getting me here. If you think I missed anything or want to share your point of view, leave a comment. If I got some of the numbers wrong, feel free to correct me too. I tried to make sure they weren't off, but I'm not an economics guy. Alrighty, that's about enough out of me. Until next time.